Hilchot Yesodei Torah, Perek Tishei. I'd like to recap what we saw at the beginning of this Perek and mention something that the Rambam writes elsewhere. Rambam began this Perek by saying, Davar barur mefurash b'Torah. It is explicit and plainly stated in the Torah. Shehim miswa umedet ve'olam u'olamei olamim. That the Torah is immutable for all time. And lo shinui v'lo gera'on v'lo tosefet. Cannot be changed, not added to, not detracted from. Shneimar kol hadavar she'anochi l'sawa etchem oto tishmeru la'asot lo tosef olav v'lo tigra' mimenu. That which I have commanded you, you shall keep. Do not add. You may not add nor detract from it. This pasuk speaks about the things that are clear and known to us. In other words, things that are plainly written in the Torah. According to this, we are to conduct ourselves. That in itself is an important injunction that the Rambam mentions here, because all too frequently we hear people expressing opinions, views, based on Midrashei Aggadot, Zebe Mikra Atov. That's in some of the better, less serious cases. In worse cases, we hear people claiming that we can decide a certain issue based on some Hasidic story that they heard, which of course may or may not have happened. The latter is more likely, I would say, most of the time. And this is precisely the wrong approach. With regards to Aggadot, we find even in Chazal that are clearly authentic and ancient. We find in the Yerushalmi explicitly in the name of Shemuel, En lemedim min ha'Aggadot. We do not learn from Aggadot. Now, what does that mean? If you cannot learn from them, then what's the purpose? What's the aim of these Aggadot? En lemedim min ha'Aggadot, as is clear from the Yerushalmi, where it's quoted in other sources, means that you cannot learn anything halakha ma'aseh, anything practical, pragmatic, anything in the real world. Things are not decided according to Aggadot. The Aggadot have a purpose. They enlighten us and add to our understanding of various things, but you cannot base any real world decision based on such things. Kal v'chomer, how much more so with regards to this or that Hasidic tale, or some ma'aseh shehaya, that someone claims such and such took place and so and so said this and that. Again, one can usually assume that it wasn't exactly as it's being told to you, or that it was embellished over time. And these are very important things. Recently, a certain individual, whom I do not know personally, but has begun writing to me, taking umbrage and disagreeing vehemently with the statements I have made in the past about the Melech HaMashiach not being from the dead. You're probably familiar with the statement of the Talmud Bavli in Sanhedrin, where it says that the Mashiach imina hayim, then he's like so and so, imina methim, then like so and so. And this person, in fact, wrote an entire composition, some kind of a lengthy article to prove that the Mashiach can be from the dead. You can imagine, I think, without me going into the details, to which particular Hasidic sect he belongs. And here again, this is, and of course, the proofs, the argumentation is entirely spurious, based on a misunderstanding of the texts of the statements of Chazal, which this is a classic example, cannot be taken at face value, or rather, you can take them at face value if you understand what it means, and not what you would like it to mean. So we won't go into that topic further. I may devote a shiur to that topic, more in-depth shiur about that.
Is there a way to know why so many traditions that people claim to have received seem to take precedence over statements made by Chazal when it comes to Hilchot that they follow?
Why traditions or statements that they heard or received take precedence over what Chazal say? Well, there is no one size fits all answer to that, because in certain cases such a claim may be true. Not in I would think a majority of cases, but in some cases it's true, because of a very much changed reality and set of circumstances. And certain things need to be re-examined, revisited. And this is not new. We see this in the Tosafot, for example, quite frequently. But even before the Tosafot, the Gaonim did the same thing. Gaonei Bavel, the claim of some people, certain Rambamistim, for example, that the Tosafot are guilty of this, of moving away from Chazal, not taking Chazal at their word, is not true. And the Gaonim, when they felt it was absolutely necessary to do something like that, they did exactly that. For example, according to the din of the Talmud, if a person owes another person money and cannot pay or refuses to pay, the Beit Din can appropriate this person's land, his field, sell the field, and from the proceeds repay the debt, but not but only from real estate, not from other property. So they cannot take his jewelry or his car or his camel or whatever it may be. This was the case for various reasons, as the Talmud explains, in a time when the vast majority of Jews owned some land. But in a later historical context, where a majority of Jews, or many Jews, did not own land, this became an impracticable way to run Jewish society. Because if you maintain that halachic position, and many people have no land because they're merchants, shall we say, which is exactly what happened, then the entire economic system will fall apart, and people will not give loans to people who need loans, because they believe that it's very likely they will not be repaid. And precisely for this reason, so that the door will not be shut in the face of potential borrowers. That is why Hillel came up with the Pruzbul. So So the Geonim simply said, well, the halakha from now on is such and such, that the property, even if it's not real estate, of the person owing money may be seized in order to repay the debt. That was something that had to be done. Otherwise, Jewish society would have degenerated on many levels. So that's just one example. Of course, many examples. Rambam continues. So we see from these pesukim that we are required to live according to the Torah, to observe the Torah for all time. Adolam. V'chen hu omer. Hukat olam l'doratechem. It says many times in the Torah. Hukat olam l'doratechem. This is a statute for all your generations. And it is also stated that the Torah is not in heaven, meaning, which goes back to what we said before. The Torah was given to us and was received by Am Yisrael and was explained by Moshe Rabbeinu, by the Nevi'im, and we are able to determine, to judge, to determine, to decide on our course of action on almost any issue without reference to Navi or something of that nature. Rambam says, this is a very important concept. And this is an explicit quote from Hazal. That no prophet may introduce something new or change the Torah in an essential way. If you want an example of such a thing, one that comes to mind, the claim was not made, of course, that not in so many words, that I am a Navi and therefore I am saying such and such, but we know that in the Lubavitch world, it is claimed that not only is it not necessary to sleep in a sukkah where conditions allow, weather and other conditions allow this, but in fact it's not correct to do so. One should not sleep in a sukkah, no matter how clement the weather and how reasonable the circumstances are. You should not sleep in a sukkah, which is, of course, which contradicts explicitly statements in the Mishneh and the Talmud. But first of all, the Mishneh, that even shenat arai, even a nap, a brief nap, is outside the sukkah, is asur. For this very reason, many years ago, I don't remember what year, Gaon Harav Eliezer Menachem bin Shach Zitzal, what year he passed away, but this was some years before, quite a few years before he passed away. This must be at least 30 years ago. He was giving a speech at a rally, a large gathering of so-called Lithuanian Jews, and this was in, as I recall, in Yad Eliyahu, in the stadium in Tel Aviv, known as Yad Eliyahu. There were many people there, and he explicitly referred to this and the Rebbe of this sect, and he said, and I'm quoting, he said, this man is an apikoros because the Talmud says A and he says B, and that simply cannot be. From his perspective, it was very straightforward, very black and white. Such a thing simply cannot be accepted, cannot be countenanced. Without going into all the details, how this developed, how this came about in that Lubavitch world, the fact is that this is practically speaking, this is a hidush. This is exactly what a Navi is not allowed to do. En Navi Rashai Lahadesh Davar Me'ata means that you cannot come along and say, because of some new insight. In this case, the claim was that it's based on Kabbalistic insight and reasoning, that this halakha is simply inoperative. In fact, it is the opposite of what is desirable and correct and true. It's a very, very serious, extremely serious statement to make, to put it mildly. Now, I wanted to quote from Rambam in Hilchot Malachim u'Milchamot in Perek Yud Aleph. So if you can look that up, it's the end of this Mishneh Torah. Before we look at Hilchot Malachim u'Milchamot, let's continue for a moment here in Hilchot Yesodei Torah. Let's read another halakha or two. Having established this principle, Rambam says here in Perek Tishei, halakha beth in the Machon Shilo edition. Therefore, im ya'amod ish ben Yisrael ben min ha'umoth. If a person, any person, Jew or non-Jew, comes along, ve'ya'aseh oth u'mofet, and even seems to legitimize himself by way of some particular ability or prediction or action that he performs. V'yomar she'Hashem shelacho losif miswa, and he claims Hashem sent me to add a miswa to the Torah, or livro'a miswa, or to detract a miswa, which is similar to what we just discussed about the sukkah. Or lefaresh b'miswa min ha'miswot, perush shelo sham'anu min Moshe, or to explain in a very different way, and to explain a miswa, to interpret a miswa in a certain way, as in terms of how it should be understood and performed or observed, in a manner which is very different from what we heard and received, the Torah She'Ba'al Peh from Moshe Rabbeinu. Or she'amar she'otan ha'mitzvot she'nistaru b'hem Yisrael enan le'olam u'ledorot. Or he claims that, yes, those mitzvot were all very true and correct at that time, but they no longer apply. They're only for a time. Which, of course, is a reference to the claim of the Christians. Ela mitzvot lefi zaman hayu. These mitzvot were for a period of time, but not for all time. Rambam says, by definition, we know Hare za navi shakel. Such a person is a false prophet. Such a claim, by definition, contradicts that which Moshe Rabbeinu states in the Torah more than once. We saw some of the Pesukim Rambam quoted above. And such a person is to be executed by way of strangulation. Because he dared to speak in the name of Hashem, to claim things in the name of Hashem, which Hashem clearly did not tell him. Shehu Baruch Shemo Siwala Moshe, because Hashem said and commanded Moshe, Sham Miswah Hazot Lanu Ulevanenu Avolam. As we said before, this Miswah, this Torah is for us and our descendants for all time. V'lo ish el yichazev. And literally, Hashem is not a human being who changes his mind. Now we can look for a moment in Hilchot Malachim u'Milchamot, Perek Yud Aleph. Rambam here is talking about Yimot HaMashiach. And Rambam begins by saying, HaMelech HaMashiach Afid la'amod u'la'hazir malchut beth David v'yoshna. The Melech HaMashiach that you have all heard about so much, he's speaking to any Jew who's reading this. You've all heard about the Melech HaMashiach. But really, have you heard what exactly one is to expect? What is it all about at that time? What will happen at that time? The first thing Rambam says, in his time, there will be a Malchut Beth David. There will be an independent, sovereign Jewish nation ruled over by Malchut Beth David, which means L'chatchila, in the normal state of affairs, where possible, by a descendant of David HaMelech, as far as we're able to tell, and the most certain way of knowing such a thing would be by way of Novi, if he is available. And Rambam later discusses here what happens if such a person is not available. So this Melech HaMashiach, Afiv V'Amod V'Hazir Malchut Beth David Liyoshna, he will return the self-governance and sovereign existence of the Jewish people, Liyoshna, as it was in the past. HaMemshala Harishona, as it was, as the Jewish government was in earlier times. That doesn't mean, of course, that it has to be precisely identical in all ways, but he means to say, and he explains exactly what he means. HaMemshala Harishona, which means Uvone Mikdash, in his time there will be a Mikdash. It says here that he builds the Mikdash, but it's not an halachic requirement that he built it. But it is quite likely that it will not be built before, because the real thing preventing Mikdash today is the fact that there is no Jewish government or regime that wishes there to be a Mikdash, or in fact they wish there not to be a Mikdash. So as soon as you are able to achieve regime change, Lichora, such a regime would want to build a Mikdash and would go ahead and do exactly that. As it states in Bava Batra Daf Daled, in Malay Malchuta Light Banem Makdasha. In other words, if it were not for the regime, for the ruling powers that want the Mikdash to be built, then it cannot be built. It's not a private enterprise. Israel, and in his time, the remaining Jews will be ingathered to Eretz Israel. And here Rambam states, and all the statutes and aspects of the Torah in his day, at that time, will exist or will be reinstituted, mikodem, as it was before, keshayu mikodem. Which means, makrivim korbanot, there will be korbanot, v'osim shemitim v'yovelot, and the mitzvot of Shemitah v'yovel will be observed, kechol mitzvotan ha'amura b'Torah, exactly as prescribed in the Torah. So you will note that here, interestingly, Rambam stresses that the Torah was not changed, and one of the essential aspects of the Yom Mashiach, which is really just another way of saying the normative situation of the Jewish people. Anything other than what is described here is not the normative and not is an unacceptable state of affairs. That's the first thing for people to understand, which many do not understand. In other words, many people perceive the current reality or the reality of Galuth, or what the Poskim refer to as Bazman Hazeh, and at this time, as being the norm. And Yom Mashiach is some kind of additional extra, some sort of optional extra. You can have, Yahaduth, you can have Yiddishkeit with or without this Mashiach, either way. It's nice to have this. It's like the luxury version. It's like the upgraded version of the car. You can get it with leather seats or with regular seats. No, that's not how it works. This is the norm. And it's very important for the Rambam to stress this. He could have just said, In his day, there'll be a Memshalah, there'll be Jewish self-rule, and there'll be a Mikdash, and the Jews will be, all Jews will return to Eretz Yisrael. And that too, by the way, is not a hard and fast rule. Well, let's say there are a bunch of Jews, who knows where, somewhere on the planet, and they say, well, no, thank you very much, we'd rather stay here. That doesn't hold the rest of Am Yisrael back from doing anything. If that's what you want to do, go ahead. We don't think it's a good idea. We recommend that you don't do this, but cannot force you to be here. Obviously, what it means is that, and the assumption is that Jews want to be here, and they will be able to be here if they so choose. Rambam continues in this chapter. Let me see where it is in Hilchot Mamureh. In Halacha Waw or Gimel, depending on your edition, Rambam goes on to state, Al ya'ale al da'atecha. Do not assume for one moment that the Melech HaMashiach is to be some kind of miracle worker, that he will revive the dead or perform other miraculous deeds, or similar notions that foolish people believe and claim. And then Rambam goes on to explain why he says this. I won't go into that right now. But the reason Rambam says all of this becomes apparent in the next halacha Zayin in the Machon Shilo edition. He says, "Va'ikara devarim kachahem." The essential truth that you must appreciate and internalize is as follows: HaTorah hazot en hukah u'mishpatea mishtanim le'olam u'le'olamei olamim. Exactly the same statement that we saw in Hilchot Yesodei Torah. In other words, Rambam is at pains to explain that as distinct from most people's expectation or understanding of this concept of Yemot HaMashiach, which involves, as he suggested before, a complete revision of the order of things, of nature, of the world as we know it. This is not true, and the Torah also does not change at all. The Torah and its laws do not change. Again, the same statement exactly. We do not add nor detract from it, not then, not now, and not ever. And anyone who does so or suggests that we do so, or a person who literally is brazen-faced with respect to the Torah. In other words, dares to suggest that the mitzvot are not to be observed and understood as they are written, as they were intended to be understood, as we have always understood them. Any person who suggests such a thing, shegila panim b'Torah v'hotzi ha'devarim shel ha'mitzvot mitpeshutan. And again, this is directed at Christian type ideology. Any such person is, by definition, a charlatan and a liar. Rasha wa pikoros. Such a person is clearly, if this is the claim, this is his ideology, such a person is a rasha and a pikoros, someone who does not accept the Torah. As Rambam describes, one of the definitions of the term apikoros in Hilchot Teshuvah Perek Gimel is a person, a machish nevuato shel Moshe Rabbeinu, a person who contradicts the nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. So by making such a claim, a person is contradicting and denying the nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, where the opposite is stated, that Torah is immutable and eternal. And the Rambam is not yet finished. It's very, very clearly very important to the Rambam to drive this point home. So he continues and he says, "V'im ya'amod melech beth David." So if a leader from the house of David HaMelech appears, the person who studies Torah and observes the Torah, the Miswah, David Avihu, as his ancestor David HaMelech did. According to the Torah, the written Torah and the oral tradition. In other words, again, you see, Rambam is stressing and being very precise. He says, such a person who claims to be the Mashiach, or that we think is the Mashiach, has to be someone who lives by, studies, and lives by the Torah as it has always been understood, and not in some radically different, newfangled way. And he, as leader of the Jewish people, ensures that the Jewish people follow the Torah. And fights the Jewish people's battles against their enemies. That is what it means, Milhamot Hashem. And such a person, we can, based on the circumstances, based on what we see with our own eyes, and as Rambam described previously with regards to Rabbi Akiva, which we did not read here, well, if we see that such a person is leading the Jewish people and succeeding and fighting the Jewish people's enemies, such a person is Beheskat Mashiach. We can begin to assume that he is the Mashiach. And if he continues to succeed until the entire program, so to speak, is implemented, he overcomes the Jewish people's enemies. And he is able to rebuild the Mikdash and ensure that all Jews who wish to come to Eretz Yisrael can come. Then we know, then we can say with certainty this is the Mashiach that was discussed and described in the Torah in vague general terms, and by the Nevi'im in more specific terms. And therefore, later in Halacha Yod, in the Machon edition, Rambam refers explicitly to Yeshua HaNosri, because the claim was that he was a Mashiach, and Rambam therefore refers to this claim and rejects it. But all this is connected to the claim of the Christians also that the Torah is no longer relevant, or much of the Torah is no longer relevant. So this is a very essential part of an authentic Torah ideology. So I thought we should make that connection between Hilchot Yesodei Torah and Hilchot Melachim u'Milchamot. And now we may continue.
Could you give a stricter definition of what peru shalosh amanu mimosha means? Because chidushim and new ideas are they play a large role in the halakhic system also.
Yes, that of course is true, but peru shalosh amanu mimosha refers to Lemashal, the claim of certain sects in the ancient past that Shavuot must fall on a Sunday, right? Mimuharat HaShabbat. That is a peru shalosh amanu mimosha. In other words, it's to do with the actual essence, the quintessence of the mitzvah. First of all, when is this day? What is Mimuharat HaShabbat? What you do on that day is another question. First of all, when is this day? How do you know when this day is? Well, we have a clear masoret how we know and what we need to do to arrive at that piece of information, when Shavuot is. And any claim to the opposite effect is a perush shalosh amanu mimosha. That is a perush which which attempts to undermine and contradict the Torah Shebaal Peh in an explicit way. If another example, I do think that the example we mentioned before of sleeping in a sukkah is also a valid example, because it's a very it's explicitly written in the Mishnah. It's obviously what Chazal received and what they teach. Any claim to the opposite effect, that all of a sudden, no matter how hot or cold or wet or dry it might be outside, you should not sleep in a sukkah, is clearly contradicting the Torah Shebaal Peh. It doesn't state explicitly in the Torah to sleep in a sukkah. It doesn't say explicitly to eat in a sukkah either. It says teshavu, which means really to reside, to live and be in the sukkah for 7 days. And in the Torah Shebaal Peh, this is broken down and in detail. So it speaks about eating, it speaks about sleeping, etc. The claim, the general blanket claim that sleeping in a sukkah is wrong, is not a good idea, and you should not do it. Not because it's cold, not because you're mista'ir, because it's too hot, or because the mosquitoes are eating you alive and you can't sleep, in which case you're patur from the sukkah. There's no argument about that. Or that it's raining, or whatever it may be, or it's dangerous to sleep outside because of crime, what have you. Crime or friendly or not so friendly neighbors of various ethnicities. And this I mentioned very deliberately. I remember decades ago in the Iratika, in the Rova Yehudi in Yerushalayim, Jews who do not have a mirpesah to build a sukkah in their home, built sukkot out in the street in the Rova Yehudi, in the Jewish quarter in the Iratika. And there was no problem to do so. The security situation since that time, which I remember well, has deteriorated to a degree which is difficult to describe. So already many, many years ago, I think at least 20 years ago, Rav Avigdor Nevensal, Shlita, the Rav of the Rova Yehudi, a Tamid Muvhak of Gaon of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal, he said that people should not sleep in the sukkah outside, because there were cases where Arabs were attacking or threatened, or it was simply no longer perceived as viable and safe to sleep in such a situation. So in that kind of situation, there's no mahloket that you do not sleep in that sukkah. But to claim that it is because of some new spiritual insight, some mystical understanding, which overrides the Mishnah, that's an extreme and outlandish claim. Another classic example would be if a person said in tefillin, you need to have not 4 parshiot, but 5 parshiot. I received a nevuah, or I understood this by learning, by studying Kidvei Ha'ari or Sefer HaTanya, that there has to be a fifth parasha in the tefillin. Okay, well, that's a classic example again of a peru shelo shamanu mimoshe. This has nothing to do with what we call hidushim. In other words, we have a miswa to make a baracha on whatever it is that we eat, shall we say. And there is a discussion amongst the poskim what the proper baracha is for a particular food, shall we say. And a person comes up with a powerful proof why it should be this baracha, not that baracha, or why the position of Rashi is not as it was understood by so-and-so, but in fact Rashi meant to say something else, or Rambam's opinion is not as misunderstood, but really Rambam holds such and such with regards to this question. Even though maybe it's not a furash, but you can understand from something else that Rambam says perhaps elsewhere that this is what he thinks about this question. That's a chidush. That is an insight into the Torah, into the existing halachic system. And so it's a refining and clarifying, adding clarity and profound understanding of the concepts and of the parameters of this halakha, of this question, but it's not changing anything in the system itself. Okay? Perek Tishei, back in Hilchot Yesodei Torah, Rambam says, so therefore this is the halakha gimel or bet, depending on your edition. If this is the case that a Navi cannot change anything, why does it say in the Torah, Navi aqim lahem mikarav ahem kamocha, I shall raise up a Navi like you, like Moshe, from amongst their brethren, from within the Jewish people. When I will place my words, what it is I wish to communicate, I will convey to him, and he shall communicate to them whatever it is that I tell him. So why do we have a Navi if he cannot change anything in the Torah? What is the purpose? Rambam says, the aim, the purpose, the job description of a Navi is not to invent, create, define a new religion or a new system, a new halachic system. In other words, a brand new halachic system which contradicts the essential principles and rules of thumb and assumptions of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, not to invent a new religious or halachic system. The aim, the purpose of a Navi, which is of course what both Yeshua HaNosri and Muhammad were doing. So any person, Jew or non-Jew, who makes such a claim is a Navi Sheker. So what is the purpose of a Navi? L'savoth al divrei Torah, to exhort people to study and accept and live by the Torah, and to warn people not to transgress the Torah. As the last of the Nevi'im stated, Zichru Torath Moshe Avdi. Remember, and we constantly mindful of the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. This is the last of the Nevi'im. So the last of the Nevi'im refers us back to one of the earliest of the Nevi'im. Similarly, if this Navi tells us with regards to something which is not connected to something that Torah describes or commands, go to such and such a place, or al telechu, the Torah doesn't tell you to go to this place or not to go to that place, but this Navi, and you know him to be a Navi, says this is what you must do now, or asu milchama hayom, or you must attack the enemy today, or al ta'asu, or do not do so. Benu homazo, build this wall, or al tivnuha, or do not build it. Miswa lishma lo, it is a miswa. We are commanded to accept these instructions and these statements of the Nabi. This is the 9th of the 10 mitzvot included in Hilchot Yesodei Torah, as Rambam lists at the beginning of Hilchot Yesodei Torah. The 10th was Lishmo' min hanavi hamedaber bishmo, to accept the word of a Navi who speaks in the name of Hashem. V'ha'over al devaro, and a person who transgresses the explicit instruction of the Navi, hayav mitha b'idei shamayim, he is hayav to die. He's liable and guilty of a serious transgression, because he is essentially destabilizing the entire system of the Torah, and this is a threat to the Torah and to the Jewish people's existence now and in the future. But this he's worthy to die, but not by Beth Din. This is Bidei Shamayim. This is in the hands of Hashem. Shene'emar v'haya ha'ish asher lo yishma' al devarai. The man who will not listen, will not accept what I have said by way of the Navi, asher yidaber bishmi, the Navi who speaks in my name, onochi adrosh me'imo, I shall literally demand it of him. In other words, I will make a reckoning with him. Similarly, v'chen Navi she'avar al divrei asmo. The same is true for a Navi who stated that Hashem said to do such and such, but he himself does something else. That is also a very serious thing. V'chen Navi she'avar divrei asmo, v'hakovesh nuvuato, or a Navi who receives nufuah and is instructed by Hashem to inform the Jewish people of what he has received, or to do a certain thing. And he is kovesh nuvuato. In other words, literally, he buries it deep within himself and does not perform that which he was instructed by Hashem to perform. Such a person, hayav mitah bidei shamayim. He is hayav mitah bidei shamayim, again, because he is literally contradicting and rebelling against Hashem by so doing. And with regards to all three of these, the pasuk that we just stated, Onochi adrosh me'imo, I shall reckon with him, I shall make a reckoning with this person. In other words, I will deal with him. This refers to any of these three possibilities. A person who refuses to accept what the Navi says. B, Navi who himself does not accept what he said. In other words, he says one thing and then changes his mind or does something else. And the Kovesh Nuvuato, the Navi who refuses to perform the Shalichut, the task that he was set by Hashem. So we must stop here for today.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.